Hello, everyone, and welcome to another author interview. My name is Adrian, and I have the pleasure today of being joined by an award-winning author, recent winner of the Locus and the Nebula Award for his novella Ring Shout. And we'll be discussing his new novel, A Master of Djinn, which takes two of his novellas, The Haunting of Tramcar 015 and A Dead Djinn in Cairo, and expands them into his first full-length novel. And welcome, Phenderson.
Hey,
DJL Clark, very nice to have you.
Thank you.
How are you today?
I'm good. I think it's the first day here. I'm in Hartford, Connecticut. It's not raining like in a week and a half. So this conversation has brought the sun out. We'll see how long that lasts.
Well, I'm glad. And how have you been faring recently? I mean, you and your family, everyone's doing okay?
Well. Everyone's okay. I mean, everyone would like to go outside. Outside of the rain, but yeah, we've been well. It's just what an amazing difference a year makes.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of people in the US are vaccinated at this point. So
hopefully.
Yeah. But do you see, just in your general life, do you see that there's a bit of a difference? And especially you being a professor, has the environment changed at all? Or are you still teaching from distance?
Well, it's the summer, so I haven't done it yet, but we return in the fall. And when they do, they're going to make it mandatory. If you want to be in a classroom, you need to wear a mask. So that's good. If you want to take online classes and you don't want to wear a mask, okay. But if you want to be in the classroom, you need to, I said wear a mask. That's incorrect. You have to be vaccinated.
Yeah. So you have to show up. You have to show up to class with your vaccine passport.
But somehow, I said I don't care. We can put stormtroopers outside the door, whatever. So that everybody has the understanding you need to have it.
It's like, if you want to get in here, please show your papers.
Please, show your papers. It's my only slight bit of yes. I don't have any problem with that bowing to authority. Please show your papers for the greater good. So I mean, I hopefully everyone complies. One thing about being here in Hartford, we haven't had too much. We never had too much of an issue in getting people to wear masks or those kinds of social distancing. People here seem to realize that's what they needed to do.
Yeah, I mean, I was recently in Miami just on a family trip, my wife and my son, and Florida's an interesting place.
That's a different course. Yeah.
That's a very interesting place right now because we had I don't know why there's this tendency for people to address you with a mask on. And then once they start speaking, they just pop it down and say, oh, what is that that you need? And my mind just explodes because I just think you're defeating the whole purpose.
It's not working now.
No, it's not working now. And it's just this strange oxymoron of masks as this concept. And then people just not understanding what the function of them is.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting that there are parts of the world in Asia and elsewhere where there's long been a tradition of wearing masks, and I think it's interesting here in the United States there's not, and so it's simply an awkward thing for so many people. So I was you said Miami, I was in Texas where my father still lives, and going back to Texas, it was a little different. Even though I was in Houston, it was different in seeing how many people were unmasked. Or
I mean, you're in a metropolitan area
and everything.
Yeah, but there's just this general. I don't know if it's a lack of care, or just people not really wanting to know, or if it's just a disregard for rules. A fuck you to the system. I don't know.
How about a bit of all of it?
Just all of that mixed together.
Yeah, and then odd belief systems and conspiracy theories and other things. Just, I think I put out this this thing on Instagram. It was a political cartoon. It's the 4 Horsemen of the Apocalypse, and one is in the back on his phone, and one in the front says, "Hang on, pestilence is sending out an anti-vax meme." I was like, yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
Oh man, that's perfect. I have to go back and look at your Instagram and find that.
That's just about right.
Just causing shit, just causing a little.
Hey, I all I can say is, we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot better. It's great to be able to go outside a few places, but everyone still take precautions. It's still a global pandemic. So.
Of course, yeah. And for people that don't know who you are. I'm just going to give a quick recommendation. Back in October, Phenderson did a podcast with the creator of FanFiAddict, mostly centered around his novella Ring Shout, and I really recommend checking that out. So if you just go to the feed for authors on a podcast talking books and head back to October, you'll find that. And that's kind of a good sideways addition to this conversation, since we'll be talking about this book here, A Master of Djinn.
Oh, you got one. See, I don't even have one near me. If my agent would like put his hand to his pocket.
I got it, man. I got you covered. Like, it's okay.
What's wrong with these authors who don't know how to advertise their books? So thank you for having me. I don't even have one in the background. I'm like, yeah.
Dude, don't worry about it. It's okay. Yeah. Your face is sort of like the focus right now. So
good.
Yeah. But I love this cover, but the British edition is just spectacular.
Yeah, I just got the English edition. I have it somewhere around here. I did like, at first when they told me the idea, I was like, oh, then I saw it and I was like, that's brilliant.
Yeah, it's so nice. It's
something
so
about
nice.
it fits. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, give us a little bit of a bio about yourself and who you are and what you're sort of bringing to the table as an author in the speculative fiction world.
What? I'm DJL Clark. I write stuff sometimes. When I'm not writing, I'm an academic historian. I have been in this writing game, I would say, for like 20 years, trying to get published, getting a lot of rejections and racking those up, and started getting published a bit more around 2010, and really it was 2016 that I think began, I would say, my trek of getting longer works published. And my most popular work at that time that was published that year was A Dead Djinn in Cairo. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, that was the gateway that allowed me to expand on that world and to publish other works like Black God's Drums and Ring Shout and what have you. And so it's been interesting that I've been doing this. I've been writing for a while, attempting to get published, but my story isn't he wrote that first novel and it was out. It's, like 15 years went by and then suddenly there's success.
It's rarely the case that someone just like spits out a novel, and there's some magical editor that just appears from the ether and fixes it just enough to make it publishable. Yeah.
Right. And so, it's been work, and it's, some of it's been fun, some of it's been frustrating, but it's still, I'm still surprised to be here. Mm-hmm. I'm not even certain where here is. And people like ask me, where are you an accomplished writer? I said, I got a book out, so
yeah. Well, it's an interesting idea, because I don't think there are very few authors who have a here, because it's a pretty transient industry, in a sense that you have a project and you're working on that project, you're hyper focused. It goes through the editing phase, then it goes through the publishing phase, and then it's just out there. It exists as a thing. And then everyone else has the opportunity to consume it and interact with it. And then you're just on to the next project.
Yeah, basically.
So, so the here is always shifting.
Perfectly, except for how slow the publishing world is. And so by the time you've probably been on to 2 projects.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Since you sent that thing off and it's finally gotten published. But
unless you're a self-published author, in which case things just pop out real quick.
That, and you have to do all the work in marketing it. And that's a lot of work.
Yeah,
that's a lot of work. It's a lot of time and it's a lot of labor.
Yeah. And for you, this sort of journey, once you actually got involved in the publishing industry and you started to meet people, I know your editor is Diana Foe at Tor.
Yes.
And you have these sort of collaborative relationships with a bunch of different people. How has that been for you since the days of Dead Djinn in Cairo and shifting forward 5 years to A Master of Djinn?
It's been interesting because like all that I've done so far has been really, other than short stories, has been at Tor, and it was Diana Foe who picked up out of the ether. She was the magical editor. It was like, I've told the story with
she was the djinn that appeared out of nowhere.
She was. A Dead Djinn in Cairo was simply a story that I'd written that was too long. Mm-hmm. I'd wanted to be a short story. It was too long. And I said, I'm not cutting this. It just won't work. Cut. And so I literally put out a Facebook post. And I said, wow, if there's anybody who's interested in a weird story set in alternate Cairo with a suit-wearing detective, let me know. And a few people responded with places where I could send longer works. And Diana just popped up and said, "Hey, that sounds interesting. Send it to me." And here we are. Right? So it was somebody, I mean, no, one of my friends said, "You mean all I have to do is go on social media and like an editor fairy godmother will appear?" I said, "Yeah, it turns out. Who
Could
knew?"
be, yeah.
And
I mean,
so, and so, yeah, I mean, after that, it was really working with Diana because, I did, when I put out A Dead Gin in Cairo, I did not expect it to have success that it did, that people would really like the story. And so, after that, Diana asked me, I would say like several months later, after it was published, really, she's like, "Do you have anything else you might want to?" And I said, "I have a little story called The Black God's Drums that I've had sitting around." And next thing you know, that's also published. And so a lot of it was really working with Diana. She was also who I pitched, for instance, all of my works, Ring Shout, pitched to her just absently sitting in a coffee shop and talking to her on the phone, and I pitched just an idea. And so she was the main person I was working with. And unfortunately, Diana's left tour recently. And so I have, some great editors now I'm working with, Ruche and others, but it has been, she was like the person I was really like, "Here are all my ideas."
she was your voice within the publisher,
Yeah, she
essentially.
was often
Yeah.
my voice. So it's different working now with others, right? That's building this new experience, right? Which I'm
Mhm.
hoping will be good as well.
But that's kind of goes back to what we were saying about the here of being a
Yeah.
writer. Everything's constantly shifting, and a friend of
Hmm.
mine, he's published with Orbit, but the book that he published, the first book that he published with them, had an editor, and he absolutely loved her. And then the second book he published, unfortunately, she left to go
Right.
work elsewhere. And for him, it was kind of like this moment, a little bit of
Yeah.
shock,
It is.
but quickly it shifted into this newfound relationship with these new editors,
Yeah.
and understanding that the people that are in this position are professionals and they care about
Yeah.
this stuff.
That's the very thing, right? That, yeah, they're all professionals, and I feel confident. The folks I'm working with now. It's just the familiarity you had, right? Like I can
Mhm.
go in and remember, okay, I know Ring Shot would have looked this way if Diana didn't say, "Hey, what about this?" And this
Mhm.
thing that she said, "What about?" is now like what people, "Oh, that actually, I love that about Ring Shot," and I'm like, okay, that was really helpful,
It's
and I
like
can
that
trust
wasn't
that
my
thing
idea,
with
but
a lot of stuff. Yeah. And of course, the other person who's been, I think since, I think it's been since late 2018. I have was it 2009? It was late 2018. I have an agent, which was something I didn't have before.
Mhm.
And so, and I have an agent who is hands on, likes to read all my stuff before I send it anywhere, and also gives me wonderful feedback. And Master of Djinn, for instance, I had an ending which I thought was quirky and funny. And he said, "Yeah, that's quirky and funny, but eh."
Mhm.
He said, "I need more." And so I was like, "Okay." And so my ending, I would say, "You should thank my agent because I had that ending in my head, but I didn't go there." And he
Yeah,
was like, "Yeah, go there."
yeah, but that's good. I mean, it's like the pestering
Yeah,
voice in the back of your head
yeah,
that just emits a simple
yeah.
and that
He
is
the
enough to
big,
just push
he
you.
gave
Oh
me the
my
biggest
god.
meh you could possibly give. I was like, "Oh wow."
And actually, I finished. We'll get into it later, but I finished A Master of Djinn yesterday,
Mhm.
and the ending was perfect. It was
And
really
now I
poetic.
imagine, what if I had gone and I had done the quirky ending? Would everybody have walked away?
Eh,
"It was a good book, but eh,
yeah, just
yeah."
the ending kind of fell flat.
Mhm.
But I mean, it's
Oh, it's
really.
some people. It would have been like, without giving it away, it would have been like in the first Avengers movie,
Mhm.
if if it had all ended before the big monsters came out of the big machine monsters
Yeah,
came out
yeah.
of the sky. If the whole movie had ended, you'd have been like, "Okay, that's a
But
good
there's no
movie."
like cut out the entire final battle scene and just
Right?
go with it from
That
there.
last battle scene, you would have been like, "Okay, that was a good movie." I
Yeah.
can't fault it. It did all the things it was supposed to.
But where the hell does the MCU go after that?
I know, exactly.
It's like the next movie, they're all just hanging out in a coffee shop, just like, okay, what
They're
do we do
eating
now?
shawarma. They're eating
Yeah,
shawarma.
yeah. Oh my
Right?
god. Well, actually,
Right.
that's a perfect transition. Thank you for dropping that little comic book Marvel reference. I wanted to jump back into your history. First off, sort of like your introduction to literature, but also comic books, because I know you're big into comic books and stuff like that. So how did those things kind of come together throughout your life to influence you and inspire you to be a writer?
Oh man, so early on, I was talking about my most formative year. I was born in the United States, but my parents are from the Caribbean,
Hmm.
from Trinidad and Tobago, and as often as immigrant parents will do, at least they used to do, they sent me back home to live with my grandparents for like 6 years or so. And so my early formative years are all my memories are of Trinidad. I
Yeah.
don't remember the United States early on. I remember Trinidad, and so I grew up in the middle of Afro-Caribbean culture. I grew up in the midst of where carnival was every year, and carnival characters, this fantastical folkloric characters were there. And we have a large South Asian population in Trinidad. So I grew up watching Hindi TV and watching, the Mahabharata and other things played out,
Just steeped in
on the screen.
Bollywood.
Yeah, and steeped in early Bollywood. And even if I didn't
Amazing.
understand any Hindi, or
Yeah.
just going to festivals and being part of it, or hearing stories, like the amount of folklore you can get between Afro-Caribbean folklore and Indian folklore. I mean, you've got a lot, and some of that has made its
Hmm.
way into some of my stories, right? And
Yeah.
certain ideas. And so all this to say, I think I early on I grew up in a world that where a little bit of the fantastic wasn't abnormal to have in a mundane world.
Hmm.
And and then after that, I came back to the United States, and my father introduced me to a ton of old Boris Karloff movies and Godzilla movies. And my mother was a big Twilight Zone and Star Trek fan. So I got even more. And then I got taken to the library every week. My sister and I would go to the library every week. And I just became immersed in reading stuff speculative. And so I always tell people, I can't remember a time when I wasn't into speculative fiction in some way, whether
Hmm.
it was listening to oral stories, whether it was visual, and then it turns out to be in forms of in literary.
Hmm.
I was just always gravitated towards it somehow.
Yeah.
And I started reading, I think sometime back then, I think it wasn't until I went to New York as a kid. I think it was an aunt of mine. She had a bunch of comic books, and I guess she was reaching that age where she was like, "Oh, I'm not going to do comic books anymore." She
Yeah.
was like, at time she was like in her early 20s, and she just gave them to me. And I hate that I lost these comic books, and I
That's not
look
a
back
time to
at
give.
them.
That's not a time to give up on comic books.
Right. To me, well, I mean,
Come
back then, I
on.
guess for her, she was like, I'm gonna, and so she gave them to me. And these comic books, like I remember back now, they were like early comic books for Black Panthers and the Avengers and
Hmm.
all of these. I have no idea what happened to them, but I loved them. And early on, my comic books, I couldn't get my parents to buy comic books for me really, because they were like, read books, you don't read comic books. And so I went to the library, and people remember, like I used to check out the comic books in the library.
Yeah.
So it meant that I was reading stuff completely out of order. Just whatever they had is what I read.
But it doesn't really matter because comic books kind
Yeah,
of work in this like
soap
multiverse.
opera type. Yeah, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's like
yeah,
self-contained stories, and it doesn't really
right.
have that much of a through line, so you can just kind of mix and match and create your
Yep,
own
yeah,
patchwork of comic book history.
exactly.
It's
Yeah, you can. And I think it wasn't until I don't think until I was really in high school and I was making my own money to do what I wanted, that I really got into comic books. As like, I'm going to collect these titles, right?
in
And
order
I'm
too.
in order, and I'm going to go back and read these graphic novels. And so I really got into them. Though I had known them all before, I really got into it. And I was a huge X-Men fan. I was like
Hmm.
all into the X-Men, all those old, God loves, man kills, those kinds of things. And
Well,
so
X-Men's a really good story for, I mean, personally, when I was a kid, I felt like a bit of an outsider sometimes, and X-Men's
yeah,
like that
yeah,
perfect
it fits.
comic book for people who are more like misfits and trying to find their place within the social hierarchy.
Yeah, it was just a great story as a, and especially as a young kid of color, as a young Black kid. I was like, I immediately, what people I think latch on to, like you said, the idea of being an outsider and difference. And I saw this, I was like, oh, there's some allusions here to civil rights movements and other things.
Hmm.
And this was under Claremont, and whatever Kirby and Lee were doing in the beginning, he certainly was very influenced by civil rights movements and such things.
Hmm.
So I picked up on that almost immediately,
Yeah, well,
right?
I mean
So
that's really cool
yeah,
because obviously these like socio-political
Hmm.
experiences and situations and movements that are going on around us. I mean, the fiction that is coming out today is a lot of it a reflection
Yeah.
of what's happening today. And back then you go and it's, you know, in the case of comic books, sometimes it's not so subtle, sometimes it is subtle, but
Sometimes it is. Yeah. Yeah.
it's this really cool intermingling of culture and creativity and
Right.
pop culture kind of marrying in this beautiful unison.
Yeah, and it also makes you think, especially what you're reading, like what I'm reading is important,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you're like, no, 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 there are actual issues in here.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of, and that's why I think my mother's introduction to me to the old black and white Twilight Zones was so interesting. It's like, okay, these are interesting, humorous things, but they have points. And so I remember it was the first time those early Twilight Zones, first time I was introduced to the fact that, science fiction and fantasy can have these political meanings, or at least I hadn't
Mm-hmm.
understood they had them,
Yeah.
right? And so I think with the comics like X-Men, I was immediately drawn to that as much as I was in middle school immediately drawn to like my first Ray Bradbury
Mm-hmm.
book, which was Illustrated Man, which I was like,
Oh,
oh wow,
dude.
it's
As
like the Twilight Zone but in print.
yeah, I mean, at this point, it's like I haven't tattooed in a while, but I was a tattoo artist for five
Oh
years.
man,
And when I
yeah,
discovered the Illustrated Man, I just lost my mind because Bradbury is this amazing writer and I love his work, but I'd never read that short story collection before.
yeah,
But just the idea of it's kind of like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales
right, yeah,
in
it
the
is,
sense that
yeah,
it's a frame story, but the frame
yeah,
story is a circus freak tattooed with
yep,
all this crazy stuff all over his body. And that
yeah.
to me was just
That was perfect, right? His body is the
intensely,
canvas in many ways.
yeah, intensely beautiful for someone
And the
who's been so
stories were
immersed.
they were just amazing to me.
Yeah.
Like each one, I remember I was riveted. I can remember literally where I was on one of the sensations being in middle school, like in seventh grade, and like reading this and just being like, it was like my science fiction had taken a step.
Yeah.
Like before this, I was really into like L'Engle and Ursula Le Guin and
Yeah.
things, and it was like the Bradbury was like, oh, I've stepped into another level here,
Yeah. Man, I wish I
like
was
an adult
reading
level.
Illustrated Man in grade 7.
Yeah, that was.
Oh my
I mean,
God.
yeah, I probably didn't understand most of it. Is what I think about, but
Hmm.
I mean, I remember all those stories. I went back and I read it again in college, and I went back recently, and I just was amazed with how much those stories stayed with me.
Yeah.
Like there's a story Zero Hour, where the kids
It's
are.
so good. It's so
That's still
good.
one of the most amazing stories to me, and I read it again recently, and I was like, no, it's still good. It's still good.
But that's the thing about Bradbury. He's one of those authors that kind of transcends the time that he was in.
Yeah.
And I actually see a lot of his writing in yours because he spent, I would say his writing was very, how do I put this? It was very purposeful in the way that he presented specific things at a specific time, all
Hmm.
the while wrapping everything in very textured and beautiful language.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of world building, but it might not hit you in the face. You know, there's a lot of subtlety there, and there's a lot of slow seeping introduction of ideas. And then finally, once you finish a book or a short story and you just think back on everything that you just read,
Yeah.
your mind just melts with this.
No. Yeah. It's
Oh,
stuff. Yeah.
yeah, man. Well, I'm jealous that you read Bradbury so early.
No, it was great, good stuff.
And in terms of just beyond comic books and literature,
Hmm.
you know, I know you do a lot of comparative studies and
Hmm.
in your teaching about cinema of slavery and
Yeah.
emancipation and those different kinds of things. So, in terms of the world of cinema and other visual creative mediums, what is it that pulls you towards something, and what are some examples of really poignant works that have influenced you and everything that you do?
Oh man, I don't. Now you're asking me these deep questions, and I don't
it
know.
was it was bound to get deep.
I mean, it's interesting. I'm trying to think of what visual things influenced me from since I was a kid, right? Watching, again, I always gravitated. If there was something speculative, whether it was the Incredible Hulk or something on television, I was watching it, right? Just because I was interested. And all this to say, by the way, I was just relating to someone how today there's so much good TV in just in speculative fiction. There's so much good TV. Whereas when I was younger, there wasn't that much. A lot of it wasn't that good. Like if
It
I
was
go back and look
campy. It was
at it,
campy, but
it was
it's
campy and it
fun.
was
Yeah.
silly. And part of it we were thinking was people didn't put the seriousness into it, right? Where now they're like, no, we want actual writers. Like you watch The Expanse and you watch the Belters talking, like they went through everything to convince you that no, this is an entirely different culture of people that have lived and grown in this. Their language has shifted, everything. You wouldn't have had that at all. Like nobody wanted to get that deep into the early Buck Rogers films we were watching,
No.
right? They were just silly. But I still loved them. Is
Yeah.
what we had, right? And so it's hard. I'm saying all this. It's hard for me to think of one film from that time period. Like my best friend and I, we still joke about films we remember, right? Like we remember the Never-Ending Story a whole lot, and we can do quotes from it or scenes. We remember. I have another good friend, and she and I, another writer, Wendy, and we always Wendy Dunlap, and we both met as adults, but we were both fans of Legend. And we were like, are we the only people who love Legend and Big Horn Guy? And so we know quotes, we know everything, and we joke about Legend all the time, right? And so films like that, films like The Dark Crystal, those are those early films that were completely magical to me, right? And I think they're like just like they're sacred. They're like those are the early films that really gave me what I want because I was always a lover of fantasy. And so I was into those. And so we think of other films like Time Bandits. Like I still remember where I was when I first saw Time Bandits, which is probably ridiculous now.
That's a deep cut. That's a deep cut.
Or like my best friend and I, we to this day still do lines from Evil Dead 2, which to us as kids was the most hilarious and ridiculous movie. And I meant 2. I don't mean the other ones.
No,
I
the
mean,
Evil Dead 2 is the best of the series.
Evil Dead 2. And so and so it's things like that, I think that, along with, like Wrath of Khan and these kinds of things, but it's like those films I consider like, okay, those are like the untouchable. Those are just, and they're most so, it's funny, they're most so perfect films to me because of the nostalgia.
Yep.
Right? Because I know people who did not grow up with them. And when I try to show it to them, they're like, okay, so there's a flying dog, Never-Ending Story, a giant turtle. Okay.
What the hell is this about?
Right. And so I realized, a lot of it is nostalgia plays a great deal in how we interpret some of these things because sometimes it's not the story itself, but it's what we were feeling at the time, the things we were experiencing at the time, and it's all of what they bring back.
But that in and of itself is a really strong influence on somebody. Like going back and watching these things again, or just remembering quotes and kind of having that repetitive nostalgia is enough to bring it into whatever you're doing at the current time. And I think, reading your work, there's always this sense of sort of magic in it. And that magic isn't necessarily so self-serious. And I think that's very evocative of the sort of campy movies from the 60s, 70s, 80s.
The Time Bandits and Evil Dead 2. And like, I'm going to make humor out of that. And my friends and I were, my good friend and I, we're irreverent. And it's funny because he's a high school principal now, right? And we're both the most irreverent. Like he told a story. He was my best man at my wedding. He told a story that people were like, "You're a high school principal." My goodness. Where it's like we're just certain things that weren't supposed to be funny. Like you said, it's campy. We found Clive Barker's first movie, Hellraiser. We laughed crazily at that movie, even though the movie's supposed to be horrific, and we just we just found so many things that were completely hilarious to us.
I mean, that's how I feel. That's how I feel.
In my writing, it's this notion of not taking everything so seriously.
I mean, that's how I feel when I watch something like David Lynch's Dune. And Dune,
one of our other favorites.
Dune is just one of my top novels of all time. But when I watch that and I watch Jodorowsky's Dune, the documentary, I just think, holy crap, like the way that people have spun this story in the most unbelievable, absurdist ways. And I love it.
I mean, that was, it's funny you say that. That's like and it has to be the long version that comes on TBS,
Hmm.
right? Where they start off by talking about the Butlerian Jihad and everything, right? That's the one we watch. But yeah, my friend, like we to this day can do the introduction with their version of the Guild and the big tank
Yeah. Oh
and
my God.
everything. I mean, yelling the weirding way where he's yelling their version in the movie where he's yelling at the Rock. Like
Yeah.
to this day,
It
one
just,
of
it
my
doesn't, it
calls
doesn't,
me,
it
he'll
doesn't make
say break,
sense.
and I'll know, yeah, you're doing the part with the Rock.
Oh my God, that's amazing. But it's
And
like,
he's a
it's,
huge fan of the novel, so he also understands. Like, yeah,
yeah.
this is
But
kind of
part of me doesn't
elsewhere, but
care because the
yeah.
campiness and the humor of it, it's not supposed to be humorous, but it just ends up being that way because of the way it was
Yeah.
made.
Do
And
do you remember the part and they took this out, interestingly, they took this out of the longer version, which is to me is a better version
mhm.
of that early one, but this was in the movie version where they're torturing Thufir Hawat and they tell him he has to milk this cat and there's
Yes,
a rat
yes,
attached
the
to the cat.
cat.
And so to this, like we still send memes with each other out the blue. If we want to we find out we're supposed to be in a serious meeting, he'll send me the meme on my phone and I have to he'll send me the picture of the cat. And we were like, what was that? What was supposed to happen there?
There was like that came out of nowhere. It has
Nowhere.
no
And it made
context.
absolutely, and it was a rat literally scotch taped to a cat.
Yeah.
Who what mushroom or whatever had they taken to say this is what we're gonna do next in this
The
scene?
production designer on that was just like swimming in acid. I don't know what the
It
hell
was
is going on.
amazing. Yeah. So yeah, that kind of
Holy
stuff.
crap.
To this day, we laugh at it because it's absurd,
Yeah.
right? And because we know the original material and
Mhm.
how absurd they managed to make it, but we still love it in some
Yeah.
way.
And I think that's really cool that you, and I mean there are lots of other authors and other creators who are putting stuff out in
Mhm.
different formats that are taking inspiration from those decades and the stuff that they grew up with. But the difference is that the packaging back then, I mean, if you look back on old sci-fi and fantasy book covers, it's just ridiculous, you know, just insanely colorful, insanely sexist, insanely ridiculous in terms of like the warriors who are just half naked, and then a woman who
Yeah.
has like bronze breastplates and all this crap. And
Those
then you
heavy
come,
metal covers.
yeah, and then you fast forward to today, the
Yeah.
packaging has changed into something that is more not necessarily more serious, but more widely accepted by the broader public.
Yeah.
And I think the result of that is a lot more freedom to do stuff that reflects your nostalgia and your creativity, but
Yeah.
at the same time it's packaged in this beautiful way. It's like, this looks like a book that you would not be embarrassed to take out of a library, but within
Yeah.
these pages there's a lot of your nostalgia and your humor kind of reflected in the characters and the situations.
Yeah, so no, I definitely agree. Yeah, some of those early, I mean, and it's funny as as an adolescent teen, of course, I love some of those covers because, I was a prepubescent adolescent, who wanted to see these things. And I would read some of those, and even some of those went too far to me. I'll always remember I was at the library and I remember these novels. They were gore novels, GOR or something, and
GR.
they had scantily clad women on the front. And the world, however, was horrific. It was the most sexist thing I think I've ever read. I think I read like about 10 pages and I returned the book. But I said, this feels weird. And this was me like at 12 and 30, and I was horrified by the things I had read
Yeah.
even there. So even I had my limit. I was like, yeah, whoever wrote this, grow up. Right? I'm not liking this at all.
Yeah.
And so, I think even then I had my limits because as much as I wanted to laugh at things, I also wanted people to take these things seriously, right?
Hmm.
I also wanted works that people would say like, okay, he's just reading stuff with elves or what have you. But no, there's some deeper meanings in this token story, right?
Hmm.
There's things about ecology in here that I think people would find interesting. And so, I think when I think about my own writing, as much as I'm also bringing in humor, as much as I just have a love of fantastic, I mean, I also bring in things that I find interesting that I want to talk about,
Hmm.
right? Whether it's colonialism or some form of politics. I put it in there because it's what's interested to me.
Mhm.
It's what interests me, and it's also what I think sometimes makes certain forms of speculative fiction stand out. That we
Yeah.
feel that it's telling us something, and it
Mhm.
can entertain you at the same time. It's
Yeah.
not impossible to do both.
Exactly, exactly. I think there may have been a time where people devalued the idea of including really powerful themes within a
Yeah,
fantastical story, but it's like, I know you're a big fan of Robert Jordan,
yeah,
and the Wheel of Time series is just
all of it.
it's
Yeah,
rife with insanely
yeah.
detailed and
Detail.
subtle. Once detail is one of Jordan's strengths for sure, but also very subtle introductions of themes that
Mhm.
are powerful to us as human beings, but also
Yeah.
who live in the here and now.
And I think that's why people gravitate towards it, by the way. I think you read that and you feel like Egwene and Rand, and you feel like, oh, I know these people
Mhm.
because I can relate to some of these issues they're dealing with. Yeah.
Well, quick aside, how excited are you for the Amazon series and the recently announced movie trilogy? No.
First of all, like the Amazon series is always a joke. I was like, so it's going to start in 2021 and it should end sometime around 2040.
Yeah.
So that's one. And so I am they show me little glimpse of a Trolloc. I've been trying to watch these little scenes where they's
Yeah.
like, if you look in the background, there's a Trolloc. I must have watched that thing like 20 times to see it. The casting just blew me away.
Yeah.
I had written an article, I wrote an article, a blog post when I first heard rumblings before they had said they would do it, like, oh, there might be something. And I wrote a blog post saying like, if this could possibly be the most diverse story that the fantasy television or fantasy cinema could possibly do, right? Because there are a lot of issues with Game of Thrones. People have their
Mhm.
criticisms. I said Robert Jordan's is there for you. He left you the blueprint. He
Yeah.
literally said, I'm plucking this world out of our own in the United States, right? It's not
Mhm.
even set in like tokens where it's supposed to be somewhere in England or what have
No.
you. It's literally supposed to be the United States. And from the very beginning, he says, I'm going to have a very diverse world. And if you read it carefully, and if you're a person of color like myself who's always looking for stuff like that, since the beginning, I'd realized like, oh, there's something there about land, or I think all of these people might be Asian, but they don't live across the sea. They live right next to everyone
Mhm.
else. I
Mhm.
I think some of these societies, what this person has charcoal colored skin, and she's in society where there are people who are not. I think we're doing something different here, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Even when I had criticisms, I could go into Orientalism and the Shancha and across the sea. But even there, like there's a black empress that is the head of this entire society. And so I said they could do so much with this diversity wise. And when they did the
Mhm.
casting, they blew me away.
Yeah.
I was not expecting them to go all in like they did. And so my fist was raised and I was very happy. All this to say, yeah, I can't wait. Even if
Well, that,
I'm anxious and nervous,
mhm.
I also can't wait.
But it's a reflection of people who really love the source material and
Mhm.
think, we have this opportunity to do this justice.
Yeah.
And I think, there are a lot of stories just beyond fiction being translated into cinema or TV. There are a lot of stories throughout history that deserve to be highlighted and reinterpreted in a way that gives them um, notice and gives them
Mhm.
the time and the reflection that they deserve, but it could be wrapped up in a fictional package. And
Mhm.
for you as a history teacher, I think you do a lot of that, not only in the university, but also in the books that you write. And so how do you kind of marry history, even your own personal history in Trinidad and Tobago or
Mhm.
Houston or New York? How do you merge all these things together to create a story that you feel does justice to the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I've taught this in workshops. I said, first of all, whenever you world build, you're building from our world. Whether
Mhm.
you set in an alt world or a secondary world, this is the only world you know. So whatever you're creating, even if it's completely created, some inkling of it comes from some aspect of our history,
Mhm.
right? So I always keep that in mind as I'm creating. And there are stories that let me do that more than others. Certainly a story like Ring Shout or Black God's Drums or The Master of Djinn, the Dead Universe series, which is what they're calling it. The Dead Djinn Universe series, you know, because we're dealing with this world and I end up doing something that creates an alternate world, I get to play with that history quite a bit. And you know, it's always challenging. You have to make certain that you don't end up falling into historian mode and then I'm lecturing and then you're like, okay, I'm bored here. Right. So I know at the end of the day, I just try to remember, okay, first and foremost, I'm telling a story.
Yeah.
And that is my job first and foremost. I am telling you a story. Everything else I can put in there, I'm fortunate enough to be able to put in there. But my job is to first tell you a story. But if I can also include these little historical tidbits, I'm going to include them, not so much that I'm like, oh, I'm trying to teach you, but I find them interesting.
Yeah.
And I think they make the story interesting, right? And so why wouldn't I include it? Like I was doing the history of Cairo. You know, I just sat reading books on the history of Cairo, and it's a very old city, a very fascinating city, a city that is at the crossroads. There's so much there to delve into. How could I ignore that when I'm creating this world?
And I think that's kind of the right approach, because if you're just dumping too much history on people, even if it's a translation or a reinterpretation of something from our world, people are, like you say, they're going to get bored because you're just info dumping essentially, or history dumping in this case. And as a storyteller, you strike that really nice balance between introducing historical events, historical characters, historical scenarios and cultures and all this different kind of stuff. But you do it in a way that's really narrative driven, and first and foremost is sort of like the flow and the pacing of a story that makes you pull through. But at the same time, it's like, as you're being pulled through, it's like, holy shit, that's really cool. And you pluck that and you pluck that, just in the same way that you find something really interesting and you put it there for someone to pluck.
Yeah. And you know, part of this, and thank you. I'm glad I'm able to do all that. You're always wondering, did I do it? But part of it is, you know, I also teach history, and even though I have captive audiences in my students for an hour and 15 minutes twice a week, I need to keep them entertained and interested. I can't be the Bueller joining on because they will fall asleep right in front of me, and so. Part of it has just been, that's been a learning process of what interests students. When do they get learning the things that they find more interesting, or how to tell them these stories in new and interesting ways that brings them in. You've heard about the American Revolution, but did you know that the British offered freedom to all of these enslaved people, and that some of them decided to fight for the British and some decided to fight for the Patriots? Let's talk about that, right? And so, did you know during the War of 1812, the United States invaded Canada? Let's talk about it.
Actually, I recently heard a podcast about that. I don't know if you know of Our Fake History.
No, I don't know that one. Yeah,
please, go check it out. I love
your podcast.
I have so much stuff to recommend to you if you're interested. Our Fake History.
I love your podcast. And so I look at those things that I think people find interesting. I try to say, like, you may know something of this story, but let me show it to you from a different perspective. So it's not like I'm telling you something different. I'm adding more. Right? I'm giving you different perspectives to it. And so I think when I'm writing, I'm often trying to do that same thing. I guess, like you said, the storyteller, I'm always thinking, what's going to keep people engaged? And when are they going to say, you know what, I kind of fell asleep right there.
Yeah.
And so I'm always trying to keep that in mind. And I think every writer does. And that's difficult.
But it's good that it's really cool that you have this interplay between your role as a professor and your role as a writer, but both of them intertwine in the storytelling realm, you know?
Yeah, they end up that history thing ended up being useful.
Yeah. But as a person, your own personal history, you've come from various places where storytelling is really important, whether it's the oral tradition and the folklore in Trinidad and Tobago, or New York, where I think the city itself is a storytelling method. Yeah. So
my mother was a master storyteller. My mother could tell you, and everybody would listen, and she would even get you to the point where she's like, "Here's the joke, it's coming," because people would start laughing before she'd be like, "No, calm down, because it's still more coming." Like my mother could tell us, like my sister and I would joke, my mother could tell you a story and just give you directions. right? It'll be like, you go this way, you go that way, make sure you stay there. You're going to go along. You're going to see this green fire hydrant, and this it's because of this, this, and this. That means you've gone too far. Go back. And so she just perfectly knew how to keep people's attention and always switch it up a bit. And so I think I take some of that from her.
That's a beautiful skill. It's a beautiful skill. And I think for you, super important as a professor, but also as a fiction writer. And I think it's really telling in the stories that you write, the way that history is interwoven in such a way where it doesn't feel like it's forced, so your mother was able to use her natural gift at storytelling to sort of weave you through this narrative. And I think for you, you've done a really good job of taking up her mantle and using your platforms to push people through narratives that are also informative, but at the same time really engaging and fun and fantastical. Yeah. I was actually thinking about Ring Shout the other day as I was reading this, and the way that you used language, specifically the sort of like Gullah speech patterns, and you put it into the story in such a smooth way that it's like, took me, I think, about like 3 or 4 pages to pick up on the way that the main characters speak, but then also once like the more like Gullah, difficult to understand Creole languages pop up, and just think like, I gotta stare at this for a minute, but it's really cool.
For what you keep on doing it, you kind of start teasing out.
Yes.
You kind of teasing out things, even though there are ways that you will never know unless you look it up. There's no way you're going to know that this means you or so, but you start and you get it from the context. And that to me, it's funny you say that. That to me is like, if you've ever sat and watched, not read, but you watch Shakespeare.
Yep.
If you watch a play by Shakespeare, those first 5 minutes, I'm like, I'm completely lost. And then let about 10 minutes go, and I was like, oh, I got it. I got you. Okay. And suddenly you just fall in, and it's like, okay, they have been speaking English the entire time.
Exactly.
So
exactly.
I get it now. Yeah.
But it's like, when do you ever hear people speak in iambic pentameter? And then on top of that, Middle English. And then you think to yourself, like, what is going on here? But then you get into the rhythm in it, and I think rhythm is really important. And the rhythm of Gullah speech is very present. And a couple weeks after I read Ring Shout, I watched a Netflix documentary series called High on the Hog.
Oh, I watched that as well. It's pretty good.
It is, yeah, but it's super interesting that it's like, I read Ring Shout and then watched this, and it was just this perfect melding.
They have a Ring Shout scene, I think the second one or so. Yeah,
it's in the intro, and I looked at that, and my wife was just didn't even register it, and I watched that introduction, and it was just like tapped her on the shoulder. I'm like, holy shit, that's a Ring Shout. And she's like, what's that? And then on top of that, it's like they visit different parts of Africa, and then they visit parts of America, but the Gullah culture really plays an important part. And so it's crazy how life just throws you these curveballs, and you read one thing and then you pick up on something, and then when I actually heard people who were descendants of Gullah culture, and then the way that they talk, man, it's like they're speaking English, obviously, but the rhythm is beautiful.
Rhythm is
so beautiful.
It's an interesting rhythm. So I tried to, like I always say in Ring Shout, I was really trying to do that the whole time in rhythm, whether it was that or it was people speaking in African American vernacular. It was sometimes hard to write that. Like sometimes I would have to say it aloud to say, like, do I drop the S there? Should I do this? Because if you don't, then it can sound caricaturish. And I wanted to make certain, no, this sounds like people I knew growing up talking, right? This is how it sounds. It sounds like, am I doing it right? And I sometimes have to step away because editors too, they're asking you. Right. And they're asking you sometimes for rules that are not always exact rules. Right. And they're like, well, you dropped the S here, but you didn't drop it here. And I was like, yeah, because people don't always do that. Like, that's part of code switching and breaking. And it's like in anything, right? Like people will speak and in 1 second they'll use a present verb, and then the next second they don't. Right. It's not. So I had to explain. It's not in each and everything. But understand that if somebody's reading this and they're familiar with this vernacular, they'll understand. Yeah, this is how people talk.
Because speech is always irregular. There's never
it's always regular. And I said
100% consistency.
Yeah, and the way that outsiders sometimes turn it into a caricature, and you hear people like, "Well, it sounds like a caricature," is that they think, "Well, there must be set rules, and it has to be each one," and they do those things like, "I be doing this," and then they
Yeah.
sound ridiculous.
But it's like it's not like they say "I be doing" every time they say
Yeah,
"I'm doing."
exactly.
It's not every
Exactly.
single time.
Exactly. And so it's like these, and it's just this understanding that you have to, in this case, you have to have some familiarity with it on this personal level and experience where you understand, okay, this is how people talk. And this isn't the way that when it becomes a caricature, when you don't have the experience and you're trying to imagine it. And
Hmm.
then it turns out wrong. So, that's always, and it's always difficult, even as you're a person writing it, because you don't want it to come across that way.
Hmm.
Right? Like, I didn't want people to read the Gullah or read the Black vernacular and then, make jokes. I've seen that too often.
Yeah.
Right? I wanted to be taken seriously.
But I think you struck a really nice balance in Ring Shout.